Insomniac Games, a name so commonly associated with Sony Interactive Entertainment these days. They've created franchises like Ratchet & Clank and Resistance, and recently hit it big with their incredibly fun take on Spider-Man for PS4. But before they were guaranteed that position alongside Sony, they had to get their feet wet in the industry, and Universal Interactive Studios gave them the opportunity to do so. While their first title, Disruptor, didn't sell very well, it was supposedly good enough that it convinced the publisher of Insomniac's talent. Noting the PlayStation's lack of kid-friendly content when stacked up against the Nintendo 64, Universal and Insomniac worked together to create a strong mascot that would stand tall alongside Crash Bandicoot, in order to market to a broader demographic. Spyro the Dragon was born. To me, Spyro the Dragon is a textbook example of how to make a collectathon that is designed to encourage grabbing everything. Whereas so many games of this kind fail to grasp that concept, Spyro takes the philosophy of collecting everything in a level and takes the necessary steps to make that philosophy work, to the point where grabbing the required amount of collectibles isn't even on my mind. I shove that shit aside and grab everything. Now, in honor of the Reignited Trilogy, and in order to reflect on how I rediscovered my love for Spyro, let's explore how Insomniac Games managed to kick ass with their very first take on the platforming genre. I'm Liam Triforce, and this is the genius of Spyro the Dragon. In design, Spyro might seem simplistic. And it's fine to suspect that. Spyro is, in every aspect, a simple game. But it's what it does with its simplicity that makes it shine brighter than most 3D platformers of its kind. Spyro has 3 key moves. He can breathe fire, charge into things, and glide. Each level has a certain amount of gems to collect, dragons to find, and sometimes dragon eggs to nab. This is the structure for every level in Spyro. Even the hub worlds and boss levels are like this. The game never compromises on this, and it only steps away from this structure for flight levels that shake things up once per world. So how does Spyro manage to stay exciting throughout, despite rarely stepping outside of its boundaries? Well, that's because every single gameplay element is fleshed out over the course of the entire game, and the game also never sits on one idea for too long. Let's look at why that's the case. For starters, Spyro has 3 primary abilities. As Spyro is a dragon, it'd be heresy not to include a breathe fire button in this game. You can use this to attack from afar. You can also charge using your horns. While using this move, you can freely steer Spyro. So not only is this good for quickly dealing with enemies in rapid succession, but it's also great for maneuvering around levels at high speeds. Gliding is great for making it to those hard to reach areas. You can pair these abilities together for different effects. One of my favorite things to do is pair a charge and glide together so I can glide much further, thanks to my momentum. Or gliding into a pair of enemies and flaming them both at the same time. You can't charge and breathe fire at the same time though, and that's something to keep in mind as you attempt to fight enemies. And yet, the best part about these abilities is not how fun they are to use on their own, but how they're put into practice via obstacles in the game. Spyro trains your brain to instantly react to enemy patterns. Most enemies early on can be killed using either fire or your charge, but eventually enemies will start wearing metal, or they'll carry a metal shield, for example. You can't beat those enemies with fire now, so you'll charge instead. Some enemies will have a hard belly, or they'll simply be too big to take down with a charge, and you'll bounce off of them, leaving you open to damage. Therefore, you'll need to use fire. These maneuvers will become second nature. When dealing with enemies, you'll instinctively pull out the corresponding move to get through them quicker and collect their gems. This is also true with the different variants of chests, as the game also trains your brain to react differently based on each chest you see. Some can be opened any way you see fit, but the metal-coated ones can only be opened with a charge. Some have to be flamed first, then a gem will pop out. You need to grab it before it falls back down. Some need to be overheated. Some can only be opened by level-specific means, like the Supercharge, Super Flame, or Fireworks. More on those abilities later. Some even require you to look for a key, and in doing so, you're guaranteed a wealth of gems. You get the picture. The game treats these abilities like reflexes, and they become a part of your playstyle. It's like when games color code enemies so that you know what move to use when you need to use it. Granted, this works best in simple games, and Spyro knows this. Of course, if things stayed this way, the game would be too easy. You don't want to get into a pattern of using these moves over and over based on what you see. That's why the game has an incredibly diverse selection of enemies that give it a proper difficulty progression. As early on as the Artisan homeworld, enemies will subvert your expectations. In Dark Hollow, you'll see an enemy with metal armor. Your first thought will most likely be to charge into him, but instead you'll bounce right off because he's too big to be taken down with a charge. He'll laugh at you and turn around. At this point, his bare ass will be exposed and you can flame him to take him down. The game will continue to throw new enemies at you that trick you similarly to this one. Dogs that lunge at you can only be defeated carefully from a distance. Norks that need to be pushed off a ledge like the bullies in Mario 64, jesters that alter the sizes of enemies, frogs that attack quickly at a decent range, metal barrels that you have to deflect with a charge, Norks with Gatling guns that force you to think on your feet, avoiding the big boy spread shots with a jumping fire shot, and charging into the little guys before they can shoot. The game never sits on one enemy concept for too long. It's extremely refreshing to see such varied enemy types in a 3D platformer. Not even Mario has this down pat, and Nintendo's been making 3D Mario games consistently for a long time now. The only exceptions would probably be the more platforming-centric 3D Land and 3D World. But when you compare Spyro to a game that's in the same league, it totally trumps Mario. In Mario 64, enemies aren't the challenge. The challenge is figuring out how to get each star. But the decision to forego enemies as an obstacle has made 3D Mario a more relaxed experience when compared to a 2D Mario game. Sure, you have Goombas and Koopa Troopas wandering around, but they never get in your way. If anything, you can use Koopa Troopas to get to your objective faster. Enemies are not a concern to Mario 64. That's why Spyro's enemies are so interesting. And you have to kill every enemy in a stage to get every gem. So you can't just avoid them like you might in 3D Mario, or even Banjo-Kazooie. Bottom line, they matter. Even bosses in Spyro are just like regular enemies. They're just a little tougher to deal with. For example, Dr. Shemp has you look for openings as he attacks since he's mostly covered in metal armor. The best way to kill Jacques is to charge him before he can attack, while maintaining that charge as you go along. I don't see these simplified challenges as a problem though, especially when looking at the game's structure. Each boss level throws tricky challenges at you in a linear fashion leading up to the fight itself, and Jacques' level has you using jesters that can't die to move platforms. One of the solutions to finding the rest of the gems in this level is quite intricate too. One of the jesters isn't close to a platform, and by hitting him you'll notice that the previously unmovable platform has been lowered. You then have to rush over there so you can climb on top before it rises. From there, you can take out these 4 enemies here in a single glide, and grab the rest of the gems around this secret area. The game never compromises on collecting and constantly encourages it, through puzzles and enemies. This is true even with hub worlds. They're full of collectibles even though there's supposed to be the break in between levels. However, since each portal is laid out linearly, you can collect everything in small increments if you want to. Speaking of enemies and collecting things, this is an egg thief. These little shits are some of the best enemies in the entire game, and here's why. They run lightning fast, almost as fast as you can charge. You'll notice that they slightly stop as they round corners or make turns. This gives you just enough leeway to catch up with them, but that won't be enough. You'll have to figure out how you can collide with them or flame them by shaving off time on each turn, cut corners, make tricky jumps, whatever you gotta do. Chases with the egg thieves steadily increase in difficulty, to the point where Nasty Nork's level has 2 chases with them around tight winding paths. These enemies are a great way of helping the player master the charge ability. I got to a point where I could just hold square and jump whenever I needed to in order to get around. It was like managing a continuous string of long jumps in Mario 64, except this game taught you why it was beneficial, and how you can get better at it. The egg thief actually helps me bridge into another topic. In the level Treetops, you might notice an egg thief that jumps up onto a confusing platform. Well, this is where we get into Spyro's ability enhancements. While the Super Flame ability is neat, as it allows you to destroy everything in sight with massive breaths of fire for a limited time, the other enhancement is much better. In the world before Treetops appears, you're introduced to the Supercharge. This allows you to travel at breakneck speeds and plow through things you couldn't previously. You can smash through chests that can only be broken in specific ways, and every enemy can be taken down in this state. You can gain even more speed if you can keep it going for a certain amount of time. It's supremely satisfying to manage a consistent Supercharge. However, it's more than just a neat tool for smashing stuff. Early on, there's a level that teaches you that you can make it to a platform far away by combining a fast Supercharge and a jump at the peak of a ramp. You can also build up enough speed to jump onto a platform that's too high for Spyro to glide onto in the same level. They expand upon the Supercharge in the aforementioned level Treetops, by having you Supercharge in order to make it to other platforms. But that's not enough to make it to the egg thief up here, so it's time to start thinking outside the box. Why stop at one Supercharge? If you take a right here, you'll notice you can land on the slightly distant platform while maintaining your Supercharge. From here, you can take the second Supercharge path behind this wall straight to that egg thief. Already, this is pretty awesome, but there's something else notable in this level too. You see that peninsula out in the distance? It's out of reach for a regular glide, so it's time to start supercharging. However, figuring out a path as you assess your surroundings will prove to be a great challenge, but definitely rewarding. You have to use all of your knowledge of the level to your advantage, memorizing every supercharge ramp and how you can go up or down them. It's not like assessing your surroundings is absolutely unheard of in Spyro levels either. In the level Dry Canyon, as you're about to exit, you'll notice a dragon sitting just out of reach. If you round a corner, you'll notice a weird ledge that you couldn't access previously. From there, you need to go through the cave and glide around the corner to make it to the dragon. This is but one example, and Treetops is a brilliant way of showing not only how effective supercharging can be, but also in teaching the player how important it is to memorize level layouts. And you might think memorizing these sandbox-esque levels would be overwhelming, but it's not. In fact, Spyro's condensed, straightforward level design is what makes it such an outstanding example of a collectathon. Every Spyro level is pretty linear when it comes to making it to that return home pedestal, so it isn't frustrating at all. Branching paths are contained and can be found using your own resourcefulness, as we discussed before with the Jesters and the Cliff in Dry Canyon. Levels in Spyro are small enough so that by the time you've memorized a layout, grabbing every gem is less infuriating and more enthralling. Some great examples of this condensed brilliance are levels like Cliff Town, where the entire level is visible at one point, but the beauty of it is figuring out how to grab every gem in the level using your glide. Same goes for levels like Dark Hollow and Ice Cavern. One is a sandbox with a few connected areas, and the other is a linear path with shortcuts and alternate routes throughout. The levels never stress me out about collecting, therefore making my experience collecting everything much more enjoyable. There may be moments of confusion when you're missing a few gems, but like I said, the levels are designed around this, making retracing your steps a breeze so that you can have that aha moment as you notice what you've missed. And even then, the remaster of this game allows you to press L3 to locate gems, effectively negating the "where the hell is that last gem" thought that might cross your mind. Speaking of which, who's that little fella flying around Spyro? Meet Sparks, one of the greatest HUD elements in any game I've ever played. Spyro's HUD functions similarly to Crash, in that it only shows you the HUD elements that you need to see when you need to see them, and Spyro is no different. Sparks also functions similarly to Aku Aku. As long as Sparks is with you, you can take an extra hit. However, Sparks will start out yellow, and as he takes damage, he'll change color. He'll turn blue, then green, and then finally he'll disappear. You can replenish Sparks' health by eating butterflies that fly out of various innocent animals that you can kill. I don't see the problem here. The reason I brought him up now is because he's more than just a HUD element. As long as he's with you and he's not preoccupied with a butterfly, he'll pick up the gems that lie alongside Spyro, functioning like a magnet. Not only does this make collecting large groups of gems immensely satisfying, but it also incentivizes staying healthy during a level. On the topic of level design though, Spyro takes every opportunity to make levels differ from one another. In layout, they don't usually appear similar and make for really exciting playgrounds to explore. I've already mentioned levels like Treetops and Jock's level, but I have a few other favorites. Dark Passage uses those Jesters to alter the size of enemies, but it also has an entirely optional layer that's broken up into small paths you have to connect on your own, whether that be by spotting a lonely gem on a ledge or gliding to a distant cave entrance. Figuring this level out, while simultaneously dealing with its unique enemy situation, is great fun. Lofty Castle is an absolute treat to explore thanks to its non-linear structure freeing fairies and supercharge paths. Gliding around levels like Town Square and Metalhead's level is really fun. I could go on forever, because truthfully, I love every level in this game. There isn't a single one that feels boring or uninspired. That's an accomplishment to me. Sometimes the enemies and the richness of what seem like simple mechanics at one point make for excellent levels. Other times, the unique nature of finding everything makes the levels shine on their own. Speaking of levels, every homeworld has a flight level and they're pretty damn cool. They're a nice change of pace. While they do focus on collecting, they're structured in a similar manner to the career mode in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. And yes, this is the second time I'm gonna make an unlikely comparison to Tony Hawk. You have a set amount of time to destroy, collect, or fly through everything in the level. And if you manage to do so under that time limit, you'll be rewarded with the maximum amount of gems. This feedback loop is similar to Tony Hawk in that its time limit forces you to improve with each run-through, so you can get every gem. The big difference here is the fact that things don't stay collected on subsequent attempts, so you have to keep optimizing your route. The levels are laid out linearly in the beginning thanks to its paths of rings and gates, but as they progress, while gates are still present, they won't guide you down a comfortable path that'll keep you under the time limit. The best way you can accomplish everything in these levels is to find a way to regain time as quickly as possible, stringing together different obstacles to create a massive time bonus. That's why I love playing these levels. The satisfaction in getting every gem lines up with the philosophy of the rest of the game. Now, I've been talking about Spyro up to this point as if you're going for 100%, and that's because the game makes it emphatically fun to do so. I've explained why. The game's progression goals are perfectly balanced though. Spyro is a collectathon where you actually can't feel overwhelmed, no matter how you decide to play. And it's the first of its kind where I'm more excited to get 100% than I am to simply play through it. The very first game I talked about in this series of videos was Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, which happened to be a collectathon. I have a confession to make. I never fully completed it. Levels in that game were massive, and while they were fun, collectibles could be spread pretty thin in them. It felt like too much at times, and as previously stated, whereas Spyro's levels make retracing your steps easy, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger's levels are like virtual cities rather than confined playgrounds. The bottom line here is that Spyro makes it straightforward, accessible, and damn fun. That's why I love it so much. And you know, it also helps that the game has an incredible sense of atmosphere. It's not like the other games I've mentioned in this video didn't, of course, it's just that Spyro creates atmosphere in its own unique ways. For starters, the art direction. Most 3D PS1 games look pretty ugly nowadays, but what makes them stick out in a lot of people's minds is the art direction. Spyro's theming is impeccable. Every level you visit is enriched in detail, even on the PS1 version, even though each homeworld has a unique feel to it, and I quite like the overall presentation in the Dreamweaver's world and its levels, for example. Nothing feels quite as homey and comforting as the Artisan homeworld, and that peppy, upbeat music track is a great way to kick off your adventure. Stuart Copeland did a great job with this game's soundtrack, all things considered. Most famous for playing drums in The Police, the man knows his way around a drum set. Most of the songs on this soundtrack have a distinct and lively percussion track, but they're also backed up by a great sense of melody. Take a listen to the Alpine Ridge music and you'll see what I mean. I could cherry pick more, but honestly, I'd be here forever. It's a memorable soundtrack that blends atmosphere and classic rock vibes for a great listen. Go check out the soundtrack on your own sometime if you haven't heard it or didn't pay attention to it during gameplay. The Reignited Trilogy has remastered versions of these tracks, and the music dynamically changes based on what Spyro's doing in a level. And best of all, you have the options to toggle the dynamic music or listen to the original tracks depending on how you feel about the music. Not even the Insane Trilogy did this, it's a great feature. A lot of people hold Spyro's music in high regard, and so does Copeland himself. He said it's some of his favorite music he's ever written. He's pretty emotionally attached to it. He grew up watching his son play Spyro, and now his son works at Insomniac. The Reignited Trilogy means a lot to him, and he's announced plans to go on tour with some Spyro music in 2019 as part of his orchestral performances. How about that? Anyway, I think you get the idea. Spyro the Dragon is a one-of-a-kind game. It's an accessible collectathon that doesn't overwhelm the player, but instead welcomes them, guides them, makes them feel comfortable despite the amount of things to discover, whether that be through mechanics, level design, or atmosphere. Spyro does it all, and it does it all pretty much flawlessly. I love this game. I love it so much because of everything it does right. How could Insomniac top this game with a sequel? Oh, they did? Well, that's a story for another day. For now, I recommend grabbing the Reignited Trilogy. The amount of detail in the lighting, textures, effects, and especially the animations is unreal. Ha! It's a great way to experience Spyro if you've never played it, thanks to its revamped controls and camera system, its new features, new voice acting and dialogue, and beautiful visuals. But best of all, the Reignited Trilogy let me remember why I fell in love with Spyro all those years ago. No matter how you play Spyro today, it's a shining example of how to design a collectathon for everyone, and I hope my video exploring the genius of Spyro the Dragon convinced you of that standpoint. I've been Liam Triforce, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Oh my god.